Chapter 5. You blasted boys, the devil take you. Don't you simpletons know that work doesn't do itself? Melania's yelling roused me from my half-sleep. After meeting Donato, I had spent the rest of the night tossing and turning on my pallet under the stairs. Daylight chased the ghosts from my imagination, but throughout the morning I could hardly concentrate on my chores. What should I do? I had discovered a crime. It wasn't legal to keep someone locked up in an attic against his will. My obligation was to denounce the maestro to the authorities, but the man terrified me, and who would believe me, a lowly apprentice? "What's the matter with you?" Baldo interrupted my thoughts. "Nothing. I decided to keep my knowledge of Donato a secret." We sat down together by the kitchen hearth to eat our lunch. "Nothing?" he repeated, squinting at me. "Nothing. I know," he said. "You're sick of work." I nodded. It was true. I was tired of cleaning. Who wouldn't be? Besides, if I told him that he was right, he might stop asking me prying questions. "Yes, I'm tired of it," I said. "The maestro only lets me touch the brushes if he wants me to clean them. He hasn't asked me to sketch or even trace a line since the day I arrived. I feel like a servant." "Well, you've got a long way to go. I've been here almost a year, and the maestro only lets me watch him draw. He never lets me try it for myself." He stared into the fire and shook his head as if to chase away evil thoughts. "The truth is," he continued, "I don't care. Painting, ugh, it bores me." His tone was scornful. "You don't like painting?" I asked, incredulous. "Then what are you doing here?" He moved back and forth on his ample backside and whispered, "They're making me learn. I told you, my grandfather is Antonio Ferruccio. My family wants me to carry on his art and his business. Either I learn with Cosimo or I learn with him." He paused for a moment before continuing in a more serious tone. "My grandfather is a greedy tyrant. He doesn't let me do anything he hasn't ordered me to do. He gives me barely enough food to stay alive, and he uses a whip with more skill than he does a paintbrush. The maestro doesn't teach me much, and he works me hard, but he doesn't beat me, and the food isn't good, but it's enough. I even manage to get extras now and then. If I could, though, what I'd really like is to learn to cook. My dream is to be the chef in a rich man's house, a house with full pantries." I could only shake my head. The sons of tailors want to be painters, and the sons of painters chefs. I wondered what the sons of chefs would want to be. I spent the next few days in the studio, sanding down boards and preparing them with a mixture of plaster of Paris, glue, and water that Piero had made up. It filled the house with a strangely purifying aroma. I hadn't been up to see Donato since my first visit. I didn't want to take any chances. "Spread it carefully," barked the maestro. "Make it perfectly smooth, or the brushstrokes will show." Lately, it seemed the maestro spent most of his time in the studio sitting with a warm woolen compress on his stomach. From time to time, he would yell for Melania to come and change it, which she did with no few complaints. My thoughts kept turning to Donato. Although I had never liked the maestro, now that I knew about Donato, his presence was almost more than I could bear. I was filled with the desire to take the pestle I used to grind pigments and beat him with it. But when he looked at me, my thoughts froze. In my frustration, I began to doubt. What do I care about Donato? I asked myself as I covered the boards with the plaster of Paris mixture. I don't really know the boy in the attic. He's not related to me, and he's not my friend. I shouldn't put my future at risk. Painting is more important to me than anything. But I knew deep down what was right. It was a crime to kidnap someone and keep him prisoner. No man can own another. It was a crime. But what could I do? At the end of the day, Melania came into the studio to assign our evening chores. "Piero, go and get firewood," she shouted. "Arduino, you fetch the water. Baldo, go around and close all of the shutters. We're going to have a hard frost tonight. When you're done, your supper will be ready." Frost had already covered the cobbles of the courtyard, and the rope that held the bucket in the well was stiff. Both Piero and Baldo had finished their chores before me and were seated at the kitchen hearth when I returned from the well. Piero had kindly moved my bowl close to the fire to keep it warm. But when he opened the door, my poor uncle found a demon with a toad's face and the devil's horns. He pushed my uncle into the paddock, and with a cord made of dried braided snakes he, as they did nearly every night at dinner time, Melania's Horrible stories held us in rapt attention, and we forgot about the thin, rancid soup we ate and the sweetly sticky odor of the lamp oil. When we had finished eating and she had finished her tale, we cleaned up and went off to bed. Late that night, after everyone, including Melania, was fast asleep, I left my tiny corner and listened to the sounds of the household. The maestro's snores, the last logs in the kitchen hearth falling to embers, the elm branch that scratched the tall studio window, the creaking of the beams, nothing out of the ordinary. I climbed the stairs to the attic, sat down next to the barred window, lifted the tapestry and looked in. Light from the full moon flooded the tiny room. Donato, seated on the floor and wrapped in his blanket, was eating. "Donato," I whispered. He raised his head and looked at me. I hadn't seen him in several days, and his gaze seemed even calmer to me than before. Perhaps I was the one who was calmer. "Arduino, thank you for coming back." "What are you eating?" I asked. "Well," he looked into the bowl he held between his hands. "It looks like a soup or gruel. I'm not really sure. It's probably the leftover soup that we had for dinner. It was made with something greasy that tasted rancid and stuck in my throat." "Probably lard," Donato said in his soft voice. "It tastes very good to me." I thought about this and realized that everything is relative. Things that made me sick to my stomach and tasted good to Donato because he had even less than I. "Isn't there any way to take off that shackle?" I asked. "No, the chain links are heavily soldered," Donato explained. "Believe me, in the beginning I tried everything. Besides, even if I could get the chain off, the door is locked and the windows are all barred." "And what about Melania? Have you ever asked her for help?" "I have, and sometimes she looks at me with sympathy, when she looks at me at all. She comes in every night with food and changes my pail, but usually it's without a word. She's too scared of the maestro ever to go against him. Without Cosimo, Melania would have nothing, not even a place to sleep. I am grateful to her, though. Without her, I surely would have frozen or starved to death up here." I had a bitter taste in my mouth. Listening to Donato, I realized what true cowardice was. Was I afraid to help him for fear of losing my apprenticeship and my chance to become a painter? "I could tell someone what the maestro is doing to you," I said. "Turn him into the authorities or send for my father, but—" Donato watched me in silence. "But I—" My voice choked. At that moment, all of my self-doubt and the difficulty of the situation overwhelmed me. "Come now, Arduino. What's the matter with you? Are you crying for me?" No, it's just that I really am such a coward." "Arduino." "Yes, I am, and selfish too," I said without taking a breath. "I could get your freedom tomorrow, but the maestro would throw me out of the studio and my father would force me to return to tailoring. As pathetic as it is, this is my only chance to learn to be a painter." Donato pulled on the chain so that he could get closer to the window. "Arduino, calm down a minute and listen to me. I don't expect you to sacrifice your dreams for me, nor do I want you to. I know that someday I will be free of this prison. Just knowing that you are my friend gives me some strength. Besides, true freedom isn't in the street or in Cosimo's studio or in the air or in the sea. Freedom is inside each one of us. But think about it, Arduino. You aren't really free either. You have to obey the maestro and Melania and your father. They occupy your thoughts and perhaps even keep you from living your dreams. I can't move, but my time and thoughts are mine alone. Do you see? I'm freer than you in many ways." He was right. I was always at the mercy of someone else. "Don't worry about me," he continued. "You will help me when you're ready. I've survived this long, and I am at peace with myself and others. I would venture to say that I'm even happy in my own way. Look." He pointed to the floor in a corner of the attic. From where I was, I could make out some marks in the dust. I can even draw and study perspective, symmetry, and composition. "You know so much about art," I said. "So much more than I do. Things I've never even heard of. Would you like to learn some of them?" "Yes, but how?" "Come up here when you can. I'll teach you what I can." I looked at him. In spite of his uncombed hair and his dirty, threadbare velvet doublet, he was an elegant man. I thought I recognized my grandfather's wisdom in his young eyes. "Yes, Donato," I said, "I will come up every chance I get."